Welcome to the first album anniversary podcast of 2025. Today's show is about Flood by Jars of Clay. Wait, checks notes. That's Flood by They Might Be Giants. It was released January 2nd, 1990, so it's celebrating a 35-year anniversary. I'm your host, Caleb, or Caleb the Spy on Twitter and Instagram, and every day on those social media sites, I post about what I call album anniversaries. So, on the Album Anniversary podcast, we take a look at a classic album on the anniversary of its release date. The show is a chance to talk about why we love an album, why an album is important to us. Albums on the show often focus on alternative rock, punk, and my strange obsession with ska. In the 90s, I was super into the Christian music scene, so that comes up often on the show. Today, Brock returns for a lighthearted discussion about Flood by They Might Be Giants. Brock, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm excited to have you back. You, I think, jump into the lead as the most frequent guest of the show, especially because you hosted your own episode. So I think you have officially taken on that crown, and I don't see anybody catching you anytime soon. So congratulations.
You let me in the door, and I'm going to squeeze all the way in.
Awesome. Well, you've been on enough, so we've already kind of talked about some of your history with, music and stuff. So I kind of wanted to ask, 2 years ago, you listened through all of your albums and you kind of documented the experience on Instagram. Last year, it was, you ran a mile each day. And last year, because we're look behind the curtain. The year's not over yet, but this will come out in early 2025. So do you have any plans for 2025 to, not just, are there internet things you plan on doing? Is there any festivals you plan on taking over, music festivals you plan on taking over, or just any things you kind of have planned for the new year?
Yeah, going to give Furnace Fest a break. I don't think I'm probably not going to go. My guess is I can't afford to go this next year, but we'll see. Also, haven't seen the lineup yet. I know that I was really excited to see a bunch of bands that I knew from back in the day at last year's Furnace Fest. But we'll see what comes up next. I know Goaty Hook is playing a show in Philadelphia, so. If I can see that, they're probably not going to have too many more shows. I don't know exactly how many shows they'll play, but they're already a legacy band and they've got day jobs and that sort of thing. So if I could see them live, I would love to. I've never seen them before, and it would be nice. So if I can do that, that'd be my optimally that's what would happen.
Nice. And then are there any other plans for? I know the kind of something you're going to document on Instagram this year. Right. Any plans for anything like that?
Personal challenges. I'm going to do the majority of 2025 without booze.
Okay.
Which is what I did for 2020 as well. And at that time, it seemed like a terrible idea. Why would I spend a whole year not drinking?
Right.
But it turned out to be really good for me then. It's probably going to be good for me this year. I'm trying to lose some weight, and I'm just not being very successful, even though I've been running a mile every day.
Sure.
Which I still have yet to do today. I got to get out and do that after we're done here. But yeah, I figured why not do that? I'm going to try and keep running, and instead of doing a mile every day, I'm going to try and do the same distance, so 7 miles a week, and kind of break that up amidst a few longer runs, but give my body a chance to rest and heal a little bit after those runs. So
sure,
I'd love to continue as long as I can in terms of staying active and staying as fit as I'd like to be. People can be whatever state of health they would like to be. I would like to be in a better one for me. So
sure,
working on a couple of things towards that. But
yeah.
Cool. I blame 5 Iron Frenzy. I broke my foot and I stopped exercising then, and that's where I am now. So trying to get back.
That's so interesting. I mean, that's so funny because I was at that show.
You were.
I didn't. We hadn't connected, I think, online to the extent, for sure, not to the extent we have now. And so I was like, I didn't even think to be like, hey, who else is here? I just didn't do that. So I chatted with a couple people here and there, but I had the chance to probably meet a couple people that I'm now probably connected with online, and just didn't do it. So failed
Yeah.
attempt.
Which part
on
of the
my
room
part.
were you in for that one?
I was right up front. Like,
Okay, there we go. You're in the pit.
yeah, I was right in front of Scott. Is
There we go.
the way I would describe it.
Perfect.
So yeah, which I was surprised I was able to get up that far because I was kind of in the back for the Planet Smashers. I think that's
Yeah.
what was the opening band.
Yeah,
And
they
then
were
I
a great,
kinda moved
and the
up.
Planet Smashers is actually who I broke my foot to when
Oh, okay.
I was dancing so hard just because like they put on an amazing show, a
Yeah.
really good band, that sort of thing. I'd love to see them again. But yeah, I'd take it easy next time.
Yeah. And then did you hang out for the rest of the show? And
I
just
did.
okay.
I did. Yep.
And then
that was
went
why
to
I
the
was
hospital
there.
after that?
I went to see medical attention when I got back to Oregon.
Oh.
I limped around Denver the next day, and I was like, I probably should like see a doctor. I thought it was just like a bad sprain or something, and it turned
Sure.
out to be, fracture in the toe. So
Oh man. Yeah, that's crazy. I took off the next day, like I was on a flight by 7 a.m. So
Oh, yeah.
which was weird. It was this is so random and not
Those are the
related to the
cheap
album
ones.
we're talking about. Yeah, and it was 9/11. It was September 11th.
oh,
So
for real? Yeah, yeah,
when I got
not
to
the
the
September
airport,
11th,
no,
but, like, the
not the
anniversary of. Yeah,
the anniversary of.
yeah. Also the date on the calendar.
Yes. And so when I got to the airport, they had just taken this like 10-minute break to like commemorate the day. So
Oh,
the
yeah.
security line had backed up for like 10 minutes
Uh-huh.
with no movement. It was the longest line I've ever been
Wow.
in. It was crazy. And I'm a bit I don't love traveling. So
Yeah.
I'm like get there early. So I was like 3.5 hours early for my flight.
Oh, goodness.
So I was plenty early, but it was like
Yeah.
it was so backed up. It was like, oh my
Not
gosh.
early enough.
Yeah, there was people in front of me who were like freaking out because they weren't sure they were going to make their flight, and I was like, this is going to stink, but I'll make it. So and it ended up not being that bad. I think they kind of realized they had to turn up the jets and hustle people through. So yeah. Anyway, well, good on you. Those are fun things. I'm excited to see what you bring to Instagram. I know you're kind of off Twitter now, so
Yeah.
it's always fun to follow you on Instagram and the things you find to post about. So
Thank you. I am here for you and for everybody else on the internet.
awesome. All right, with that out of the way, I say we tackle this album.
It's time.
Looking in the alley by the light switch, who watches over you? Make a little birdhouse in your soul, not to put too fine a point on it. Say I'm the only bee in your bonnet. Make a little birdhouse in your soul.
All right, so we're talking about Flood by They Might Be Giants, released January of 1990, and we'll talk about the date here, which we just did off camera or off mic. So we're having this conversation twice. So I have January 2nd. You can also, of 1990, you can also find January 5th. Both dates, I think, are probably relevant. I'm going with January 2nd because it is a Tuesday, and at the time, most albums were released on Tuesdays. So that's what I'm going with. I think January 5th is also probably, it looks like it was a Friday, but you never know whether it was an independent release or whatever. There may be a reason for it, but January 2nd, 1990 is the date I'm going with.
I appreciate that amount of thought put into it because I've never thought that hard about what day it might be if I'm trying to figure it out. I've just kind of thrown a pin on the calendar and gone with it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's, as I've started to look at these, like, there are a lot of things that if you go, like MXPX is a great example. There's like a MXPX archive website that has a bunch of different dates than like Wikipedia will have. And so it's like, I don't know. And then there's a Tooth and Nail archive. I think a lot of those are wrong because a lot of the dates they have are like Friday. They're just not, it more than likely wasn't released on a Friday. It was more than likely in 2004, it was released on a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's kind of this weird, like, I don't know, doing the best we can. That's why if somebody was like, no, it was January 5th and I'm going to fight you for it, I'd be like, you win. That's fine. I don't care that much, but it's fun to think about it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember my favorite local radio station in Portland had a New Music Tuesday feature where they would always on Tuesdays, they'd be like, well, what came out today? Let's sample the tracks. Let's play some singles or whatever.
yeah. And I think that's why Bandcamp does Bandcamp Friday, because I think the release date is, it's new music on the Friday. So
Right.
Yeah, because that changed sometime in 2015. They moved the release date to
I
Friday.
learned something today. This is
Yeah.
good.
I have no idea why, but
Yeah.
that's what they did. So
It's not for us to ask. We only document.
exactly. This was their third album, is my
Yeah.
understanding, and their first album on a major label.
Right. So they kind of came up in the scene, did a couple of releases independently, and then this was their first commercial release. So
Yeah.
that was the thing I was surprised by, is that it always felt to me like it was their first record. And I think
Yes.
maybe that's the divide that, I was experiencing, was just that this is the first one anybody knew about broadly.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I had never, I'll be honest, in 1990, I probably still had not heard of them at all. But yes, this is the one that kind of brings them to the forefront. Although
Yeah.
I don't know how much of the forefront it was still fairly underground in a lot of ways. So the album did produce 3 singles: Birdhouse in Your Soul, in Istanbul, not Constantinople, and surprisingly, Twisting was the 3rd single, which I think is interesting. And this is often considered their definitive release. I think a lot of people consider it that. Like, this is, when you think of They Might Be Giants, I think most people think of this album.
Yeah. Best known for their
Yes.
first record, which is always kind of sad for a band. I mean, like, they've gone on to have great success, and they
Yes.
still have a enormous following. They're nationally touring still.
Yeah.
But for someone's first record to be the one that everyone really knows them for, that it's tricky, I think, because like
Yeah.
you celebrate their success, but you also but they're so good, they keep on doing other things.
Yeah.
But we are here to celebrate this one today.
Yes. It probably is one of those things where, like, there probably are a lot of bands that are known for that first or second record.
Yeah.
I keep on going on and doing those things. And yes, you have the casual fan. And I'll be totally honest, They Might Be Giants, I'm way more of a casual fan. I mean, my connection with them is this album and Strong Bad. That's probably my 2 biggest, homestarrunner.com. That's probably my biggest connections with them, is through those things.
Right.
And
Because
so-
they had the Homestar. Are we going to talk about that later?
We can try and work it in. I don't know if
Just
I have
the
any
Homestar
other
Runner connection. It's fascinating to me because, like, I was a kid at a Christian college in the
Yeah.
early 2000s as well, and that was like before there was modern culture. You were entertained by a website called HomestarRunner.com.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
flash animation and funny voices and funny writing and pretty witty. I think like a lot of it kind of still is entertaining and amusing today.
Yes.
But eventually They Might Be Giants and the brothers Chaps from HomestarRunner.com did work together to do like a collaboration.
The fact that you called them the Brothers Chaps, I literally,
As they
what
themselves
flashed
called
through my mind
themselves.
was my people.
Yep.
If you're referring to them that way, like, I've found my people.
I don't think
Yeah.
I've posted about it, but I just got the first 100 emails DVD, like the 3 DVD
Oh,
box
really?
set. Yeah, just found that on eBay. And then what is it? Everything Else Volume 1, which is anything that wasn't a Strong Bad email from those first years. So
Wow.
I'm about to dive into my nostalgia pretty hard.
Yes, I have introduced my kids to it. I mean, that my kids think it's pretty funny.
Do they?
So,
Okay, I was
yeah.
going to ask because like I am very curious. My kids are probably too young to like think it's funny at this point, but I am curious like if it translates kind of outside of people our own age, because like a lot of it is maybe nostalgia or like tied to our own personal experience. Like this was funny because all my friends were laughing at it, but
Yeah.
whether it's funny to kids today, the kids these days, with their tight pants and their loud music, if they like this or not, I don't know.
The one key to introducing them to it is you might have to kind of find a couple that really are the standouts.
Right.
And then I wonder if like DVD format might be tricky, because like part
Yeah.
of the fun of it was that like it came out every Monday. And
Right.
so you didn't consume like an hour of it. You
En
consumed
masse, yeah.
like, 3.5 minutes of it. And then it was like,
Uh-huh.
all right, well, now I'm going to go click on the website for a while. At one point, back when we used to have voicemails on our phones, and you would have your like, this is Caleb's phone, leave a message.
Right,
Now
like a
everybody just has the
landline.
robo thing.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, I used the like Homestar Talker to like say something stupid about that. Was like, if you called my phone and got the voicemail, it was Homestar Runner saying something like, I can't remember what he said because it didn't really make
Amazing.
sense.
Characters. Yeah.
It was something stupid like that. So yeah, for a while it was Homestar Runner was answered my voicemail. Oh,
That's
man.
amazing.
Now we need to find time to do a Homestar Runner anniversary.
Got to find the anniversary of the DVD release. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that'd be too good. Oh well,
Too
I'm
far
glad we
down
got
the
that
rabbit
in there.
hole. We don't need to. This isn't part of the show, I'm sure, at this point. But there is a
Oh, I'm
website
keeping
because I was
this in
trying to
for
figure
sure.
out. Are you okay? I was trying to figure out like which ones do I need? Because like the collector's editions,
Yeah.
like especially the later stuff, is kind of hard to find and expensive.
Yeah.
And so I was looking at there is a website, wiki style assembled by fans of the release dates of the Strong Bad emails.
Yeah. Oh
So,
man.
right up your alley, right up mine, I think.
Yes,
If
absolutely.
you want to go down that rabbit hole, you can. We could celebrate each individual email on its release date.
All right, what do you have a favorite email? I'm totally leaving.
I
This in the
mean,
show.
I think my first exposure was Lures and Jigs, and I think that remains to me probably the funniest one. The
Come on, get in the fish. Or come on, get in the boat.
Fish. Yep, exactly.
My favorite is, I like it most when you hurt your friends. And that's all it is. And he's like, and whoever sent an email, this is the best email I've ever received. Then he goes and hurts everybody in town for like 45 seconds. That's one of my
Incredible.
favorites. So
Incredible.
there's so many great lines. The one from there's somebody sends in something from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. If you've
Yeah.
ever seen how Eau Claire, Wisconsin is spelled, he goes, "Ew, Claire, why?" It's the greatest read of a city ever. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, what it was, just kind of like mispronunciations and like misinterpretations of things, was like kind of the bread and butter of the
Yeah.
humor of all that. It was just like, well, why don't we take this thing and like take it to its absurd, illogical conclusion?
Yep, absolutely. And I know Five Iron was a fan, so like, I
Yes,
found a way to
Strong
move
Bad
Five
was
Iron.
thanked on the live record, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken.
Yep, and it was their last show at Cornerstone. They make a reference to they're going to try and achieve Burnination. They make a
There you
Trogdor
go.
reference. So
Amazing,
yeah,
amazing.
and the last album, Reese is wearing a Cheat T-shirt as well.
Is he?
If you
How
look
about
in
that?
the liner notes for the end is near, not the
Yeah.
end is here. The T-shirt he's wearing is a Cheat T-shirt. So
Oh, that's fantastic.
oh man. There we go. We filled another 10 minutes with just
There we
strong
go.
bad talk.
Yep.
All right, back to this record. Although I could
Let's
talk about
do it.
I could talk about that forever. All right, so this was produced by Clive Langer, and again, I'm really good at pronouncing things, and Alan Winstanley. Now, these two, and I totally messed up his name, or Winstanley. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Alan. I failed you. These guys are a duo that have worked on a number of albums together. So a couple ones that jump out to me are One Step Beyond by Madness, Punch the Clock by Elvis Costello, and then 16 Stone by Bush. So some variety
sure,
there, and
yeah.
then obviously
Yeah.
this album. So tons of credits. I didn't even try and list them all, but yeah, it was, at first I was looking them up individually, and I was like, oh, they're like one person. They've worked on all the same things. Clearly they're a duo that always works
Yeah.
together. So
The crack team that
Yes.
made it all happen.
reviews for this album were generally positive. It peaked at number 75 on the Billboard 200. So that's solid for a fairly, we'll get into it, a fairly weird album in a lot of ways. And spending 22 weeks on the charts. The lead single from the album, Birdhouse in Your Soul, reached number 3 on the Billboard Modern Rock charts. That is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, I think, at this
Yes.
point, but that's the facts. It's the history. That's what happened.
Yep. And I would argue in Istanbul, I always say that wrong, Istanbul might be the most
Not
well-known.
Constantinople.
Not Constantinople. Might be the most well-known song from this. But so it's really interesting to me, even that idea that Birdhouse in Your Soul, obviously being the lead single, but number 3. I mean, that's a hit song, is what it is.
Yeah.
Number 3.
For sure.
Flood was the first album released by They Might Be Giants to receive an RIAA Platinum Sales Award, including sales over 1 million copies, which again, they didn't achieve that right away. It was in July of 2009, and is also certified gold in the United Kingdom. So overall, this is a big time selling record. Not maybe one of the biggest of all time, but there you go. Certified platinum and certified gold. Pretty impressive in my opinion.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, I didn't get a chance to make my Jars of Clay joke yet. Can I now?
Sure. What is it?
We're about to talk about Flood. What if I can't swim after 40 days? Okay.
what's really
all
funny
done.
is
Thank
I
you.
made a Flood joke on the intro of it. So perfect. We've made 2 Flood references. That's awesome.
We're tracking the same way. I appreciate that.
Oh man. All right. I knew this was going to be a goofy conversation all over the place. I love it.
I think that's how we honor this album. Yeah.
We never had a home, but this railroad apartment was the perfect place. When she'd sit and hold me in her arms. I lost my lucky ball and chain. Now she's 4 years gone. She's 5 feet tall and sick of me and all my rattling on. She walked away from a happy man. I thought I was so cool. I just stood there whistling. There goes the
How did you first discover this album?
Yeah, I don't remember because I feel like I knew about Istanbul before everything else. Like that's the first thing I probably heard, and I don't remember when or how. It's one of those things that feels like it was just in the water. But I do remember my friend Joe, with whom I was in my youth choirs when I was in high school. He and I would hang out. He would go to his house. He'd come over to mine. But I remember spending some time at his house one time. We were a junior, senior, somewhere in there, and he said, like, oh, you want to hear some funny songs? I've got some, my brother has this tape. And so he ended up putting on Flood. I don't think that was the first time that I heard Istanbul, but
Right.
just like, he was playing whatever was on that record. And it was fascinating to me. It really drew me in. It was so weird and so
Yes.
like kind of unconventional compared to what I was used to.
Yes.
Especially just like, I didn't have a lot of exposure to indie of any kind. That was kind of before the term indie was really even a thing. But in terms of like kind of underground rock or stuff that not everybody knew or appreciated, this was, especially in the late 90s, not something that was on everybody's tape decks. But
Yeah.
that was kind of my introduction, and I did have some exposure to some of the stuff that this reminds me of, like Spike Jonze is who I wrote down. I don't know if you're familiar with Spike Jonze or
Oh,
not,
yeah.
but he was like musical comedian from the 50s, the 40s. He had like 6, 8 versions of the Charleston that were all they just had the same sort of stuff that inspired Weird Al, the stuff you
Yeah.
hear on Dr. Demento, like these kinds of things, and so yeah. I made the note that I watched a lot of like kind of slapstick comedies from the 30s and 40s, just like black and white movies, the stuff that it was safe for the family. And so we got to watch
Sure.
a lot of stuff that, we didn't troll the sewers of modern entertainment, but we did watch a lot of, like The Great Gildersleeve, and the Andy Griffith Show and things like this. And so,
Yeah.
a lot of that physical comedy, I feel like this kind of translates some of that into music. I feel like it is very akin to something that has kind of a pre-modern era sort of, not pre-modern, but it's not mid-century. It's
Yeah.
like slightly earlier. I feel like they're digging into that and kind of drawing on some of those elements.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can support that well. That might just be my hunch, but I feel like when I think about the music on Flood by They Might Be Giants, I'm like they had to have watched a bunch of old black and white comedies.
Yes. Yeah. I get the sense that it is kind of wholesome pop culture stuff
Yeah.
that they're into. Like the line, it from, Istanbul, not Constantinople, was, that it was once, it was once New Amsterdam. Why'd they change it? I don't know. It's just
People
that
just
sort of
liked
like,
it better that way. Yep.
yeah, it's just this goofiness that is kind of like, it makes me feel like old pop culture is what
For
what kind of
sure.
comes to
Well,
mind.
and so one thing to note is that Istanbul is in fact a cover. And I was just looking at the
Really?
Wikipedia article here. The original version was from 1953. So that is kind of reaching back into like earlier time. It says lyrics by Jimmy Kennedy and music by Nat Simon.
Wow.
So it was written on the 500th anniversary of the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans. How about that? But most famously covered by They Might Be Giants in 1990.
Yeah, that's great. I had no idea.
Yeah, and I guess
That's
the
incredible.
4 lads were like the early carriers of this two people.
Yeah. Well, there
Quite
you go. I
something.
mean, that feels like your assessment feels like it nailed it. Like
Thank you.
that is what they were thinking about.
Mhm,
for sure.
Yeah,
Oh man. So my introduction to this, I believe, is Rev 105. Shout out Rev 105, was the greatest radio station ever to ever exist, in my opinion.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm calling it now. It was this alternative radio station that died because it just couldn't compete with the big boys.
Okay.
But you would get stuff like this on the radio, and it would, I always make the reference that you'd listen for an hour and you'd hear this, you'd hear Rage Against the Machine, you'd hear the Violent Femmes, you'd hear Bob Dylan, you'd hear Joni Mitchell, you'd hear the Beatles, and then you'd hear the Foo Fighters. I mean, it was
Kind of
just
alternative variety format.
they just played everything, and I think it might have been to their detriment at times that they played too much variety, and you'd potentially lose people, and it just wasn't always enough to. I mean, I think running a radio station is hard, in any way, but like, yeah, they almost had too much variety for their own good. But it was the best radio station, and it was around in high school, so that's definitely my introduction to it. Was somewhere along there. And then I lived with a guy in college. He lived on my floor my first 2 years, actually just my freshman year. And he played this album all the time.
Oh,
and
nice.
He was an interesting dude because he was cool, but like he played this album all the time. But then like he'd also play Goldfinger. I mean, like he was a really interesting dude. I always tell the story of what I remember most about him is he was so good at, you can tell when I went to college, he was so good at GoldenEye, the James Bond video game. I do remember a Friday, he was the one who had it on the floor. Nobody else had it. And so we'd all go down to his room and play. And he was so good at it. It was kind of crazy. And he came back on a Friday night once and he was drunk out of his mind. Like he is barely walking, and he walks in and we're all playing. And he's like, "Oh, I'm in." And we're like, "Okay, buddy." Like, we're like, we can finally beat him.
Finally,
he is
our
sitting
chance.
in his chair, and it was his chair that he always sat in. He is sideways. He is not even vertical.
Right.
And he still kicks the crap out of all of us. Like,
Clearly
nobody touched
affected,
him.
and yet, yes, his skill was it was unaffected.
It was unbelievable.
The one thing he could do well.
Yeah, so he'd come home and put on They Might Be Giants and play GoldenEye till he knew it better than everybody else. So.
Istanbul, Istanbul. Istanbul, Istanbul, even old New York was once New Amsterdam. Why they changed it, I can't say. People just liked it better that way. Istanbul was Constantinople, now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Been a long time gone, a Constantinople. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the turn.
So, what do you like about this album?
I was just giving it a listen before we recorded, and I wanted to make sure it was kind of fresh in my mind. And it's amazing to me, like the sounds. I was also doing some reading about, like, apparently they did a lot of, like, because a lot of the drums are programmed or sampled. They're fake drums. Don't tell anybody.
It's like the other Flood. It's like the Jars of Clay Flood. What is going on?
So many tethers
reference.
between the two. No, but the way that they put it together, like it was an expensive sampler, and they sampled just a lot of really weird sounds. So some of these are drum sounds, but a lot of the samples were sounds that they made themselves, including one that was like it was his refrigerator and his counter or something. Like he just sampled that sound and then programmed the drum beats, using that.
Yeah.
A lot of the bass, it clearly sounds like keyboard bass as opposed to electric bass. It's primarily at that point, especially just the two guys. There were a lot of featured players, but the Johns, is it John Linnell and John Flansburgh?
Okay.
Yeah, primarily those two guys. And the guy who was the keyboardist was just like, he was a genius. But yeah, I think for a long time I remember hearing this and thinking like, well, it's not very good because the instruments are all fake.
Right.
And when I was listening today, I was like, the songs are catchy and the musicianship, like it does feel kind of pasted together, but like in a cool way.
Yeah.
And maybe like with my ears at the age I am now, for one thing, pop music is a lot more like computerized and programmed than it used to be. And so like there's not as much, I think at that time, especially as like grunge and alternative were really kind of picking up steam in the pop culture, like there was a certain elegance or a certain level of pride you could take in the fact that all the instruments were real.
Yeah.
For example, what is it? The Newsboys record, Take Me to Your Leader. There's a liner note that says, just in case you care, none of these instruments were programmed. Everything is real and live or whatever. And so that was, I think, probably what people were fighting against. So it's not that this is bad music; it's great music, and these guys are really musically proficient. But the way it's put together, you can tell like this is not, it's not real instruments, as it were, real, with air quotes.
Yeah.
But because of that, it kind of it's got a like an assembled quality. The same reason that you might be a fan of, like ransom note style art, where you've got letters pasted together, or collage art or something along those lines. Like
Yeah.
we took all these things and we put them together in a way that is compelling. And I think I'm able to appreciate that more now than I used to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all that to say that, I always liked the songs, but I think I have a better appreciation for the production, maybe knowing at least that, again, a lot of these samples were samples that they created themselves, or at least, they did a lot of, there's a lot of art in the way they put it together as well.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call it lo-fi, but it kind of has like, there's like a thin EQ to it. Like it doesn't have a lot of low end maybe.
Yep.
And just a lot of unusual sounds and instruments. And so that, and it's kind of subversive. Like they weren't, they didn't have like huge messages, huge like truth bombs to drop. But like, for example, your racist friend, like that's very clearly pointing out things that are wrong with the world, and kind of describing this vignette of what it's like to to take a stand on a principle when it's the time to do it. And that to me, I think, is compelling and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so unique. Like even for the time, it stands out. Like I can't imagine anything else like this getting to into a top 10 hit. I mean, it is so unique. And I feel like, yes, it's well constructed because it's just so creative. Like they're clearly going into this having some fun. But if you do listen and you don't just listen in the background, like this is creative. They're messing around with the vocals. You're right. There are so many instruments that they're throwing in here. And my guess is, one thing I read was that, they just had more money than they had ever had before. So it's kind of like, well, hey, let's try this. And like, I like that idea that they kind of played with that and really did try and stretch themselves. And, maybe all of it doesn't, there's moments where some of it doesn't work. Sure. I can live with that. But it was kind of like, we're going to go out there and we're going to throw everything at the wall, give it a shot, and, see what sticks. And I just think it's so creative. And it's just so fun. Like there's no way around it. And yes, there is, right smack dab in the middle of it. There's the song Your Racist Friend, which kind of does like throw you off a little because you're like, well, okay, where'd that come from? But yeah, I think it's just such a fun record to listen to.
Absolutely. And there's also a lot to be said for, I've been thinking about this recently about auxiliary percussion, and I started noticing it because I've made a little bit of music in my day. I would love to make more, but I've been thinking about what are the things that make a recording come alive. And one thing that's interesting is how like not just the drums, but shakers and jingling things and hand claps and whatnot. And there's a lot of that in the production on this record. As I was listening to it, you got hand claps, especially. I'm trying to remember which song it was on, but it's very like very engaging. It's very, in a sense, live, for something with so much programming on it. Like it feels organic and human in a lot of ways too.
Yeah.
Especially because of like, those sorts of elements.
Yeah.
I just saw Sixpence None the Richer. They came through my town recently. And so I saw them live, and they brought Steve Hind along from the choir and various other things, also notable producer. But as a producer, he was an auxiliary percussionist. And I've seen a few, like Semisonic had one traveling with them when I saw them last year. But it's not common to have like somebody just like, shaking tambourines and sleigh bells and whatever else into microphones. Like you don't usually have that with a rock band. But I was amazed at how much it added to the live experience as well. And so, it's that secret sauce. And again, that's the sort of secret sauce because of all the unconventional sounds as well. But there's just a lot of stuff happening on this record. And so it feels full, even though, again, it's kind of that not quite lo-fi, but like kind of thin EQ, what have you. In some places, it's also very rich and very well produced and orchestrated.
I didn't apologize for when I was 8 and I made my younger brother have to be my personal slave. Did a large procession wave their torches as my head
why is this album important to you? And if it's not important to you, why is it something that you think still holds up to this day?
Well, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have it on vinyl if it wasn't important to me. But no, I think They Might Be Giants, their place in pop culture, just that they've kind of carved out a corner of pop culture that they've remained relevant in. I think that's really impressive to me.
Yep.
And then I don't know if you've heard the 60 Songs That Explain the 90s podcast with Rob Harvilla. He did an episode about it's about a song, and he always kind of ranges around and talks about a lot of other things that are connected to it. But his episode on Birdhouse in My Soul, it talks about his own personal connection to that song and like what a big deal it is to him. And he kind of makes a compelling case that it should be a big deal to you too. And so yeah, I think I appreciate that there's something about just there's an ethos to it. It rings warmly, I think, in my heart as I listen to it. So I feel like it's partly watching other people enjoy it. It's partly watching people love what they love. And then, my own personal history as well of some of these songs have been around for a long time. And I've introduced multiple people to the song Istanbul.
Sure.
And it's it's just one of those things. It's kind of like I don't want to call them like nerd rock derisively, but I think they'd probably own up to the fact that they are kind of a version of nerd rock.
Right.
And they've kind of worn that badge and kind of, I don't know, they've been maybe cultural leaders for people, especially because now nerddom is kind of a cool thing in some ways in many places. And it's kind of more celebrated than it has been. But these guys were carrying that flag, a long time before it was cool to be a nerd.
Yeah.
And there's something about like the vocal delivery, like the vocal delivery is kind of like almost like a self-consciously kind of nerd style singing. And again, not saying it derisively, not meant to be offensive or it's not an insult, but there's something about it that just kind of feels like this is music for people like me who are interested in science, who know really weird arcane details about things, and who appreciate, like the songwriting perspective from a lot of these songs is kind of like this vignette, like this really zoomed in on this particular moment of experience, down to Birdhouse in My Soul, where it's about a nightlight, it's about someone remembering this nightlight that kept them safe at night when they were a kid. And so how cool is that? I can get down with that.
I think the nerd rock aspect of it, the fact that they weren't, this sounds like I'm being negative, but I'm not, they weren't trying to be cool. Though I don't feel like they were trying to go out and impress anybody. So they weren't hitting a trend. They weren't trying to emulate a trend. They were just making something that I think probably brought a smile to their face. And that's maybe something that makes it hold up and makes it very, very endearing, is that, again, it just, there's no way you could convince me that they were trying to go out and they're not trying to impress the punk rock kids. They're not trying to blow anybody away with this thing. Instead of, it's like, we're just making this for us and people like us that we think will have a good time with it. And that is something that makes it, you can put it on and it feels a little timeless in some ways, because pin this down to an era, although I'll come back to that in a second, because I do feel like it is an amazing snapshot of 90s alternative culture, right? Coming out of college radio, this is a good when I think of the transition from 80s college radio to 90s alternative rock, there are three bands that come to mind. One is REM, because they blew up and became one of the biggest bands in the world.
And they rode from one to the other, yeah.
Right. The other one is the Violent Femmes, because I feel like they're also this, where do you put them? What genre are they? Folk punk isn't really a thing. I mean, it is, but it isn't.
Not yet.
It's like them and AJJ are the only two bands that have ever occupied that space at all. Yeah. And then this, I feel like this is this amazing idea that Birdhouse in My Soul hits number 3. It's this big selling album. It's the right time for it when being a little weird. All three of those bands, well, not REM, but They Might Be Giants and the Violent Femmes also always make me think of OK Cola for some strange reason. Even though OK Cola is, I think, way later in the 90s, it is.
But it was
still
kind of a
this weird alternative 90s thing that's going on. And I
I'm
said,
glad you remember
okay.
OK Soda. I miss it. Like I wish I could have some.
Yeah.
But it was definitely like they were trying to commercialize just like they'd done with Santa
Yes.
Claus. They were going to take postmodernism and put it in a can.
Yep. And give you a 1-800 number to call that would,
That's
did you
it.
ever?
I feel okay.
Yeah.
I
What
must
would
have
it
called it.
do?
I don't remember. Did you?
Oh, we called it all the time in our
Uh-huh.
youth group. I mean, there was
But you
a,
would leave a message, right? It was just like, tell us why you feel okay.
I think you could do that. And then there was like random facts, I think, and quotes that you could,
Okay.
like it would tell you, but it was always it was different most of the
Right.
time.
Here's a Vonnegut quote to go with your soda.
Yeah, it was. Oh man, that is even more than Surge Cola. That
Yeah.
OK Cola is a major snapshot in time. So
Right, because Surge was like, let's take 13-year-old testosterone and put it in a can.
exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of calling up hotlines, dial a song, which isn't specifically connected to flood, but I think this was a thing they were doing either maybe before, definitely after, where you could just dial this number, and it was in the day of like tape-based answering machines. So you could call this number and the answering machine would pick up, and it was like the latest song that They Might Be Giants had put together. And
Oh,
so
really?
they just record songs, slap a new tape in like once a week or something like that, and you call up Dial a Song, and there it is. They've got their retrospective collection that I've got is called Dial a Song because of that. But that's kind of a nerd thing to do, and it's
Yeah.
also undeniably cool. Like that I wish that I had done that.
Yeah.
Now it's too late. Now nobody has a landline and nobody has a tape-based answering machine. But like to do that, just to be like, hey, you want to hear a song? Call this number.
That's crazy. See,
Yeah.
that's something that just is you're not going to get in today's modern music. You're just not going to get something that weirdly unique. And again, it sounds like I'm being negative. I'm not at all.
Yeah.
I also think the sense of humor on this album
Hmm.
makes it feel very timeless. And then I think that helps for the repeat listening. Like, yes, I've heard the joke, but I was listening today and there was a line that stuck out to me that and I can't remember what it was, but it was like, oh, I've never listened to that line close enough. And that's funny. Like, so I think there is something about the humor of it that also, again, and maybe that's a bit of me and a bit of my sensibility. I like that sort of stuff. I like, Mystery Science Theater 3000. I like Five Iron for their weirdness. I also like them for their seriousness, but like,
Yeah.
I like that weirdness and I like that humor
Yeah.
that comes through.
In
So
equal measure.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, there. What's the line? It's in Birdhouse as well about where he says he shouldn't be a lighthouse keeper because he'd be bad at his job. And what was it? Something about Jason and countless screaming Argonauts,
Yes.
capsizing to their deaths.
Yes.
So yeah, that's quite the line to write in.
Yeah. Well, it's just a great pop culture. Like, I don't know, it's Jason and the Argonauts. I think of the movie with the little mechanical owl. That's my Jason and the Argonauts. I've never read the book. I'm not smart
Yeah.
enough for that. So I bet you
Yeah.
they've read the book. Guarantee it.
Probably so. They've read
Yes.
every book. I think
Yes.
that's that's why they're as good as they are.
Exactly.
My head can't tolerate this bobbing and pretending. Listen to some bullet head and the madness that he's saying. This is where the party ends. I just sit here wondering how you can stand by your racist friend. I know politics for you, but I feel like a hypocrite talking to you.
All right. So we've mentioned a couple of songs, but what are some of your favorite tracks from this album?
Well, I've got to call out Birdhouse because was such a big song for them, and it's big because it's good. Like I
Yes.
think it sticks with me. There are textures to this, and again because they're using a lot of like non-traditional instruments, it's such a weird song to have been a single, and yet
Yeah.
they chose it and it was a single, and people liked it.
Yeah.
But like, what's the just like? I think it's also sample based, but it's like this blown out horn solo where it's just like someone just berating a trumpet, But
Yes.
it's coming from a keyboard, I think, or from the sampler,
Yep.
and it's so weird, but it's like it's also so good.
Yep.
The textures, the feeling of the guitars, like there's just a lot in that song sonically to love and to like. So
Yep.
definitely that. We've talked about Istanbul. I think knowing that it's a comic song that's been around for a long time, but they brought it back for a new generation of people.
Yeah.
And that song is just funny anyways. Like the way, it was written to be funny, and so it is. And the phrasing, that's nobody's business but the Turks.
Yes.
That, again, they didn't write it, but they sure delivered it well.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
Particle Man is just hilarious to me because it's supposed to be kind of this dumb caveman song, right? Like it's clearly meant to be simplistic. It's telling a weird story about, four unusually named characters.
Yeah.
And what's up with these guys? Why does everybody hate Triangle Man? Why does Triangle win? Because he's pointy? I don't know. Like there's not a lot of answers there, but like it's endearing and it sticks with me too.
Yeah.
What sticks with you? What songs do you like?
Well, I will say I think the first 7 songs are pretty great. Like some of the back half of it, I could leave or take, but like those first 7 songs, and really 2 through 7, because the first song is kind of that little intro. And Birdhouse in Your Soul, I know it's not the opening track, but it feels like it because it's kind of like the theme. They have They Might Be Giants theme that starts the
It's
album.
the first real song.
Yeah, and I think for all of its weirdness, it still has such a great catchy, like that drum part at the beginning. Like it's a great little drum opening to a song that like kind of just kicks things off so well. So it is such a great opener. And so yes, I think that Birdhouse in Your Soul is absolutely great. And Istanbul, not Constantinople, I'm just gonna say it that way. I still think it's probably their most well-known song. I will say I know Birdhouse in Your Soul, it's that they're 1 and 1A, but like I feel like that Istanbul song, like even people who don't know who they are know that song because somebody's played it for them at some point.
For sure.
So I think that one's a really great one. I do like Your Racist Friend. I do love the little social commentary in there. I think it is a nice little touch to the album. It brings down, it makes it a little more serious, but like it's still a great. It's just, I don't know, it's really nice social commentary in the middle of it. And it's nothing overly deep, but I like that song right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And then Whistling in the Dark is maybe my favorite song off the album. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's weird, really,
Also
really
a
weird.
weird
But
song.
I love Whistling in the Dark. It's just such a strange song. And
Like it's almost annoying, right? Like if I didn't like it so much, you could see how it's the sort of thing you would sing to like bother your siblings on a road trip or something.
Right. And maybe it stands out so much because it is in the middle of the second half of and side B is just not quite as good as side A. And even though there's like 17 songs on here, it is still a 43-minute record. So my guess is it fits on one vinyl. It is just side A and side B. And I don't know if there's just something about Whistling in the Dark kind of being right smack in the middle of that second half and the second half not being quite as good. So it just stands out more. But I agree. It's a weird song to like, but I really love that song. Yeah. I don't know if it's maybe just the song that stands out the most to me from this record.
Minimum Wage, great song. That was used as it was like kind of a callback or like a segment opener for a talk show host that I used to listen to on the radio a lot.
Oh, really?
So that was the first place I heard that song, I think, or at least the first place I remembered it. I was reading up on that, particularly on the Wikipedia article, and definitely a big plug. If you guys like They Might Be Giants, go read the Wikipedia article if you haven't already, because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to know. These are very interesting people. But apparently they were looking through like professional sound effects that they could use and insert on that, for that kind of like whip cracking sound, minimum wage, yeah, just a big whip crack sort of thing, and they couldn't find an acceptable like stock sound, so they had to make it themselves. And I don't know if they made it with like if they had a whip or what they were doing, like how they made that sound, but they found a way to make it work.
That's hilarious. Of all the things sampled on here, that's not one of them.
Yep.
That's
it's original
funny.
creation. Yep.
Particle man, doing the things a particle can. What's he like? It's not important. Particle man, is he a dot or is he a speck? When he's underwater, does he get wet? Or does the water get him instead? Nobody knows. Particle man. Triangle man, triangle man. Triangle man hates particle man. They have a fight, triangle wins. Triangle man.
35 years later, somebody's never checked this album out, or maybe I've always just not given it the deep listen because it's something they heard and they said, oh, that's funny, and they've never really taken the deep dive. Why should somebody go back and check this album out?
Yeah, I think if you want to laugh, if you like funny things, then give this a shot. You might think that it's funny.
Yep.
If you wondered who was behind Dial a Song, if you dialed it up every week back in New York when you lived there in the 80s and 90s, then that's who this band is. If you want lessons in comedic understatement and overstatement, I think they do both, and they kind of flex humor in both directions. So I think they did a good job with that. If you want to know how comedy can carry heavy concepts to the listener that doesn't expect them, this is how you sneak things in. That's the lessons in subversion. If you want to carry your secret evil agenda to the masses, this is how it's done.
Yep.
And also, just to note, I think I was thinking about bands like Bare Naked Ladies. I feel like that is maybe a direct result of They Might Be Giants. That there are similarities, I think, in their trajectories and how they approach music. I think that there could be a connection there. I've never heard it cited. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I think that could be. So those are my reasons.
Yeah, and I will say it. There may be, you may listen to this and you may say, oh, not all of this works. I think that's fair, right? They were trying a lot of things. They were kind of going out and kind of experimenting, and I don't know if they took inspiration from Devo. That's maybe a forerunner to them. I don't know, but especially now, I'm really thinking about the minimum wage whip. But
yeah,
I don't want to classify Devo as just Whip It. They're so much
Whip
more.
It good. Yeah,
there's so much more than that song in a lot of ways. But I do think, yes, you could look at this and be like, not all of it works. Fine, but when it does work, it's great and it's fun, and I do think it is such a snapshot of that kind of when weird started to become okay, and then weird started to become cool. Because in high school, I wanted to be weird. I didn't want to fit in with the jocks. I didn't want that. I was happy being a little weird and finding enough places where weird kids could exist and be okay. And this was one of those things. Now, it for me, it went into more punk rock and some other areas, but I think this is such a great example of one of those things that started to make being nerdy and being a little weird and being kind of a funny, quirky kid more okay, or at least, hey, there's other people like you out there. And so I think that's the thing, is that there's not a whole lot before this where I think you can point to and be like, yep, those are weird people who made huge radio hits. This is one of the first, and I think it kind of is a landmark in that regard.
These are the prophets that led you to your people.
Yes. Yeah. And I love there's a real sense of DIY on this. I know it's, again, when you say DIY, so many people think of the punk rock scene, and that's not this, but there is a real DIY nature to this, especially with their first two. Maybe they got a little more money behind their DIY here, but I mean, the idea that they're going out there and just let's see how many samples we can find and throw them at the wall, that is, I think there is a DIY nature to this.
Yeah. I think they're punk as hell. They're like zinesters. They're like the guys who just, who stole their employer's copier to make little books to distribute. That's great.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know how many people cite them as inspirations too. It'd be, it'd just be interesting to know. I'm sure there are, you bring up the Bare Naked Ladies. I'm sure there are some pretty famous musicians who would be like, oh yeah, I remember hearing Flood. My brother played me Flood for the first time, and Birdhouse in My Soul, and it made me want to go tinker with music and kind of figure stuff out. So I would guess that there are plenty of famous musicians who've can kind of have had this connection to They Might Be Giants and kind of this album in particular.
Blew out your pilot light and made a wish. She doesn't have to have her DB's record back now, but there's not a lot of things that she'll take back. She wants to see you again. She wants to see you again. Slowly twisting in the wind. Twisting.
That's it. That's our breakdown of Flood by They Might Be Giants. Again, released January 2nd or January 5th, 1990. Either way, it's celebrating a 35-year anniversary. Brock, I know you are less so on Twitter, which is sad, but I totally get it.
Where you can at me, bro. You can. I'm still there.
I know you're there, and I get it. I totally.
I just
understand.
remove my content. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand. I'm debating what the future holds for me on the old Twitter machine. But where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Brockman, Brockmon. I'm on Blue Sky at same handle. And then I'm in the 90s Christian music recovery group on Facebook. So
Yeah.
that's where most people that are interested in music would probably find me.
Some people might say you are the 90s recovery group. Like it really does center around your content. I feel like
I've been
the majority
grateful
of the
that
time.
no one has kicked me out yet.
No, it makes for so many lively conversations. I sadly I'm not on Facebook a whole ton, so I'm more of a periodic checker. So
No
but yeah,
problem. And then you get too much of me all at
yeah.
once.
I don't get enough of you. I'm sure of it. You also do have a podcast that you're on.
Yes,
So
thank
where
you.
can people check that out?
I think I got in trouble for not mentioning it last time you and I recorded something together. So, a pickle home companion. Yeah. If you're fans of Christian ska and you are fans of podcasts where two lead singers of Christian ska bands talk about anything and everything together, and then you are also fans of other people who listen to that podcast who want to talk about the same topic sometimes, or just like whatever else is on their mind, that's what a pickle home companion is. Was that
Yes.
a good summary?
Yeah, it's a
So yeah,
hard one to summarize. I'm not gonna
yep.
lie. Yeah, and
You have to really tell the whole story, I think, to get people there.
and it's morphing into its own thing. I think you guys are kind of also finding, what you guys have started to have a couple guests. You've had definitely by the time this comes out, you'll have had Reese was on the show from Five
That's
Iron,
right. Yep.
Joel
And then Adam from Goaty Hook.
Adam from
Yeah,
Goaty Hook
Adam
was
the
on the
drummer
show.
is going to be he'll be that'll be released as of the time of this coming out. It'll already be out there. So
Yep.
yeah.
So you guys are just kind of starting to find your legs, and everybody. I mentioned this on our youth group podcast because you joined us for that one. Everybody, Kevin, so far has a date picked to come on this show to talk about
Oh,
an
excellent.
album. So I'm gonna
Do I
have.
get to ask which one he's going to do?
Oh, I don't have one for Kevin yet. So you
Oh,
can
okay.
guess.
He's
can you
just going to
guess-
do it at some point.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
need to find a spot for him.
Okay.
So can you guess what album Pete is coming on for, or at least what band?
He's going to talk about Switchfoot. I'm pretty
Yes.
sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
he claimed that one right away.
Yeah.
He talked to me about that last year, even before you guys started a Pickle.
Oh, there we go.
Companion.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then Jared's coming on the show. One that I'm really, really excited for. It's I think in February.
Is
Jared's
it
coming on
Me
the
Without
show.
You?
What's that?
Is it Me
No,
Without You?
it's not
No.
Me Without You. It's Spanish love songs.
Okay, sure.
And generally speaking, for non-CCM albums, I have a harder time finding guests. It's just CCM. I have an overwhelming amount of people who want
Sure.
to talk about it.
Yep.
And so
You found
for
your
some-
people.
Yeah, exactly. I found my people. For some of those other ones that are really exciting for me, I have a harder time finding. So like he posted it on Instagram that he was listening to the record, and I was like, "Hey, I want to do a show about that one in February. Do you want to come on the show? I'd love to have
Perfect.
you." So I was like, he was like, "Yeah, it sounds good." So I was like, "Sweet." So yeah, Brave Faces Everyone by Spanish Love Songs celebrates a
Excellent.
5-year anniversary. So yeah.
And I got to say, all three of the other guys on a Pickle Home Companion are so much more hardcore than I am. I think they have a wider range of musical appreciation than I do, and this is something
How's that possible?
well, there they are. When I was a kid, I always thought that like people who listen to hardcore is like, how can they enjoy that? They must have no musical taste. And then I found that everybody I know who listened to hardcore also has like a well-developed appreciation for jazz, for whatever else.
Sure.
Like they're just, they span the gamut. I think they're smarter than I am. So I respect it.
I suppose that makes sense because I don't dip a ton into the hardcore. I've got a couple of my things,
Yeah.
but in general, I don't dip into it. So you're right. That's a whole side of things that I can't speak to almost universally. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's a couple little things here and there, but I always say I like my hardcore with just a dab of ska. That makes my hardcore
There you go.
more digestible for me.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, 5 Iron.
Yeah. And thank you Link 80. That's
Sure.
They're the ska core. They started the ska core thing. That there's only been about 4 bands because it's not something that people are going to listen to. So
Yeah.
well, there was one more random pull on the show of just weird pop culture references. So awesome. Well, Brock, thanks so much for joining me. It was great to have you on the show again. I knew going into this was going to be one of the weirder shows because it's a little bit of a weird album. So
There we go.
super
You found a
excited,
weird
so-
guy to talk about it. I'm happy to be that guy.
well, thank you for taking your night. You better get your run in. It's getting it's
Yes,
not getting
sir.
super late for you, but you better get that.
Yep. It's
Probably
dark
check in
outside.
at home too. So yeah.
And I know how
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brock.
And I've often been told that you only can do what you know how to do well, and that's be you. Be what you're like. Be like yourself. And so I'm having a wonderful time, but I'd rather be whistling in the dark. 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 There's only one thing that I like, and that is whistling in the dark.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Album Anniversary Podcast. Thanks again to Brock for joining me. It's always great to have him on the show. It was such a great time talking to him about all sorts of things. It's always a joy to have him on the show. Let us know what you thought. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we mess up about this album? What are your favorites from this album? You can find me on Twitter at Caleb the Spy, no spaces. I'm also on Instagram at Caleb the Spy, and I think I'm on Blue Sky now under Caleb the Spy, but primarily on Twitter and Instagram. Really, Twitter is the main focus just because it's kind of where I am at. You can also email the show at Caleb the Spy Podcasts. That is with an S at the end at gmail.com. No spaces or underscores in that one. If you want to join the show, the easiest way to do it is probably to email me, calebspypodcasts at gmail.com. Also, Twitter is a good place to do it if I'm looking for a guest. And I do have a lot of guests already set up for 2025, to be totally honest. A lot of the show's already nailed down, but if something falls through, I will occasionally throw it out there saying, hey, I'm looking for a guest to join the show. That's the easiest way to do it probably. Or again, email me. I've got a spreadsheet. I am going to continue to do that. I'll continue working on, if the show goes on past 2025, I will just probably use that spreadsheet. So it's an easy way to sign up to be a guest on the show. Please subscribe and share the podcast. Please leave a rating or review. I have heard it is an effective way to spread the word about podcasts. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do with my friend Scott. It's called I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. It's not just a podcast where we reminisce about our youth and our youth group experience, but we're trying to interview fellow 90s youth group kids and some 2000s and kind of find out where they're at now and how that youth group experience has impacted their life. Again, whether they've left the faith entirely or they're still at the church they were raised at, we just want to hear their story and how that youth group experience has impacted their life. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Sing It Out at Street Level by Peg and the Rejected. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. But it's just, I kind of feel like it's not worth playing with my furnace.
Yeah.
The free podcast is not worth it. So. Okay. All right. Well, let's dive in. I already did pre-record, so I'll start with the welcome back. Like I usually do.
Good.
So, okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. Brock, welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Oh, you cut out right there.
Thank you for having me again. Appreciate this.
I'm going to do it again. I cut out again.
That's hilarious.
So.
As soon as we try and do a real thing, huh?
Yeah.
And obviously I can't have nice things. So.
Well, your setup for the youth group one was pretty impressive.
Oh, thanks.
We
worked
even
out
called
nicely.
it out on the intro.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I was blown away. It's like
Yep. I'm a would-be podcaster, would-be personality. Okay, here we go. I think I'm ready.
Okay. All right, I'll do it. We'll start one more time here. 3, 2, 1. January 5th, 1990 was a Friday.
Okay.
And so then January 2nd was that Tuesday. So that's why I went with January 2nd.
Right.
But I don't feel great about either of those days. Oh, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a record that day. Yeah, so January 2nd is a Tuesday.
Record high or record low?
Record high.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, 2,800.
There we go. Yeah.
What's it? Today it's like 40,000 or whatever. It's stupid.
We can attribute that to They Might Be Giants.
Right, exactly. So, okay. So I'm going January 2nd because of the Tuesday, but I don't know. I'll make mention of it. So
in your experience, do you find more release dates on a Tuesday or on a Friday? Because I feel like now a lot of things drop on Fridays.
Yeah. So,
but back then
Tuesday was the release date. 2015, it
Tuesday,
switched to Friday. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's like a date, you can look it up. It's like a date in July of 2015 where they said, hey, going forward, we're going to do them on Tuesday. We're going to do them on Friday. So
Interesting.
yeah. So, all right. All right. 3, 2, 1. Awesome.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Oh, I'm so
You
glad
you
Strong
getting
Back
excited
did it.
about the PFR recording, the new album?
I mean, are they making
Maybe.
progress?
It sounds like they are doing some things.
Okay.
They've been it's interesting because like they've done kind of a non-traditional approach.
Yeah.
Like you tried to do some crowdfunding, but it wasn't like a Kickstarter or anything.
Yeah.
And then they've been auctioning off what the opportunity to be in the studio with them. So they're still obviously tracking stuff and getting things done, but
Yeah.
that's coming soon.
Yeah. I felt bad, but I also was like, I'm looking at my budget.
Oh yeah.
I just can't
And it's not
hand
like
over.
you're getting some, it's not like a pre-order. They're just like,
Yeah.
hey, we need some money to record. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it, but I also like, I can't imagine forking over $50
yeah.
and then,
And then
know.
having to fork it over again for the vinyl later.
yeah, I just can't. And like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm the job scare that I went through. I mean, again, because I was
Yeah.
potentially out of work
Right.
and I, you know, got a new job and I was really thankful for it. But like, I know, you know, people who were I was at with my last company who were they're going 2 months now, still haven't found something. Like, I gotta, I can spend money on things. Like, we're not, you know, we're not having to. You know, we've got money. You know, we're not having a no trees under the or no presents under the tree.
Yeah.
But like,
you
it
can
did kind
afford
of wake me up
almost
to like,
anything you want, right? But not everything you want.
yeah, it kind of woke me up to like, all right, I'm gonna have to be a little more selective here going
Yeah.
forward, and you know, and so like, yeah, it was just the idea of like, no, I can't just hand over you guys, you know, money and then have to buy it again. It's just not gonna happen. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I'll be there. I'll be the first in line when it's for sale.
yeah, exactly. I will too. So, and I do hope, man, I'd love to see that there is. I mean, their first 3 albums. I'd love to see them back on vinyl or on vinyl. That'd be pretty great too. If they could
Yeah,
find a
and
way
I
to
feel
make that
like
work.
maybe there was some rumbling about that. Like they were going to start with maybe the first, the self-titled,
Yeah.
but I forget who was talking about it and if it's real or not.
I would think they've got to own the rights because like their record label was. I mean, now their later stuff, I think they might have a problem. But those first 3 are all on this like offshoot of Sparrow Records.
Yeah, was it? I'm trying to
Vero?
remember.
It's
Was
Vero
it?
Records. It's
Okay.
and when I looked them up because I just literally on Saturday recorded an episode about Great Lengths.
Yeah.
If you look up Vero Records, like they don't even have a Wikipedia page. The only way to do it is to go to Discogs
Yeah.
and then see what else they have out there. And it's 90% of the releases were PFR releases. So
How about that?
It feels like a record label that was started for them by
Yeah.
somebody else, and then it was basically them. So
Yeah, because the first one, and then what came out that Goldie's Last Day was the second one?
Cold
No,
Last Day is number 2, and then
Second
Great
one,
Lengths is
okay.
3.
that's right. And Great Lengths was also on that Vero.
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was distributed by Sparrow.
Distributed. Yeah.
So I think it's somehow connected because like if you go
Okay.
look at like the one music video we could find from Great Lengths is the song Wonder Why.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it, you know how music videos used to always have the little thing at the
Little
bottom.
strip at the bottom that tells you who
It says
what they're
Sparrow.
on.
Yeah, it says Sparrow, but if you look up that album, and I even pulled it out, it's not from Sparrow.
Yeah.
So it's this. I don't know what was going on.
Interesting. And there maybe there's like multiple pressings too or something like
Yeah.
that.
One also, it probably goes a little to them. They're one that it feels like if they could have gotten along and maybe gotten a slightly better record label, maybe they could have blown up a little bigger. Because
Yeah.
it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that they didn't hit it huge.
They've got the chops and they're catchy.
Oh
So
my
you would think
gosh.
that's what they're looking for. But
That they sound on. It sounded like the record in February. I was amazed.
that did.
It was
did.
amazed. There were so many times where I was like, "Cheapers, have they aged
Yeah.
at all?" Gosh.
It'd be funny if they were just playing the tracks like really well, in-ear monitors, and there you go.
Yeah, it was incredible. So